Hello and welcome to Writer's Ramble. I'm Michael,
And I'm Deanna.
and today we're going to be talking about Marvel's newest, I think it's still newest at this point, show, unless I've forgotten one, Moon Knight, which I think we both agree is pretty good. It's one of the better things that I personally feel the MCU has done in Phase 4 thus far. And that's due in no small part personally to me, to the fact that it's not really related much to anything else in the MCU. So like anything that might be going on, people might like feel iffy about in regards to all that. You don't have to worry about that here, and I kind of like that. Um, but that's not definitely not the whole reason I like it. And there's other things that I don't like, and we're gonna get into all that today. What do you think, Deanna?
I thought it was pretty good, and I agree. If this is a show where you're not too sure if you have to know a bajillion other, like, you don't have to watch freaking everything else in order to know what's going on in this show, which is a nice thing. It's really a standalone show, I feel like. I don't even know if there's any mentions of other Marvel characters, like, at all.
There's really not that I can think of, and yeah, that's a good point because you and I, admittedly, have not seen every Marvel show or movie up to date. I think mainly I kind of started falling off in certain aspects. I've seen some of them, but I've kind of fallen off after Endgame, which I feel like a lot of people probably did because that was the climactic big moment, and we're not going to have another one of those for a while. And those characters you might have been invested in, a lot of them are gone, and it might take a little bit more commitment than some people are willing to give to get into this next era of
Yeah.
the universe, especially considering like it still does involve things from like before Endgame. Like characters are still around, some of them, and like now we're talking about like watching 20 movies, 20, 30 movies. I don't even know how many there are at this point. Before Endgame, and then like 10 after. So like you still have to have seen all of them.
It's quite the commitment.
It's only gonna get worse over time if you think about it, because how are they gonna like do just like a hard reset so that everyone's back on the same page? It's just probably not possible at this point.
Yeah, so you don't really have to worry about that with this show, and needless to say, but I'll still say it, spoilers. So
Oh
if,
yeah, we're gonna spoil everything. So if you have not seen the show, just click off now.
yeah. So I feel like the beginning was a little slow, but it also makes sense because they're getting everything set up. You have suspense, you're wondering what is going on with, well, in the beginning, it was introduced with Stephen Grant, and you're wondering what's going on with him. And I feel like it's understandable that it's a little slow in the beginning, but I do feel like the ending was a bit rushed. They really could have used like another episode to, pace it out a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, like the first three, four episodes were like really just kind of like building the suspense of like what's going on with Steven. Why is this guy Mark showing up? Who's this Conchu guy? What's this all about? And it's like 8 episodes long, so like they have time to flesh this stuff out. I'm not really like saying it's a bad thing that they did it this way necessarily, but they could have made it slightly faster paced, and then I feel like it wouldn't have been backloaded so much in the final episode, because really I think a lot of things did happen in the final episode and in just like super quick succession. Um,
Yeah,
getting into spoilers now, like Mark came back to life. Um, Ahmed showed up. Ahmed was defeated. It like I think that this was more of an artistic decision, but you could almost look at the fact that there really wasn't a final fight scene as them having like time constraints within the episode. Um, I don't really think that that's the case. I think that was more of an artistic choice, but like if you want to look at it that way, it's like yeah, they had so much going on that they didn't even show the final fight. um, which I gotta say I was a little disappointed by.
I'll be honest, like, I don't fully recall some of these things. um,
Remember when, so like the final episode, they were fighting Ahmed's henchmen, and Ahmed was all big, and she was fighting Conchu, and he was all big, and
Oh yeah,
and Moon
because
Knight and
well, the thing
Layla.
is, because then was at the time that Jake Lockley technically would have occurred, but it was off screen because he kind
Yeah,
of blacked out.
yeah. So like him and Layla were fighting. She had her like wings, her scarab wings, because she was like Talarit's avatar at that point. Um, so she's like I can't say the name of that hippo. Tawarit's avatar, and they're both fighting Harrow, and then like Harrow got the upper hand at one point, and he was like sucking out Mark's soul, and then like he had that like big blast of purple energy judging him or whatever. He was gonna get sucked up by Amit, but then like he blacked out at that point, and like when he came to, he had like Harrow's cane, and he had it like pressed against his head, and he had
Mm-hmm.
no idea what happened. Yeah,
I do feel like that is like an interesting take, to because it does make the viewers feel, you know, taken aback, like what the fuck just happened, which is how he felt,
I
and
I honestly like don't mind the idea. It's not a terrible idea, but like you have to consider what you're cutting out when you do that is like the action climax of the whole thing, and it's like that's what we were kind of like looking forward to.
it was a thing that was being you were gearing up for
Yeah.
this big showdown, and it's like kind of like a fade to black thing.
Yeah.
Which honestly, I did that in my first like novel. Honestly, I'm guilty of that, but I was also like 12, and
Like I'm not one to like besmirch someone for trying to be like creative and original with stuff like that. However, I just feel like the loss of actually having like a really cool final battle may not have been worth the twist, you know?
mhm.
But getting into more specifics now, um, Moon Knight as a character is a man with, I think, pretty clearly definable. And I'm no psychologist, but like I think the general consensus is that he has what's known as DID, dissociative identity disorder, which means that he has several um, alternate identities who can take control of his mind, I suppose, at a time. And it's usually used as a coping mechanism, from what I understand. If you've seen the movie Split, you might have a better idea of it. Um, However, Deanna is actually a psych major, so she actually knows this a lot better than I do, and she is upset that I'm not letting her talk, so I'll just let her talk now.
Stealing all my lines, man. So, dissociative identity disorder, it was formerly known as multiple personality disorder, but it's been updated in the DSM-5, which is basically a manual that psychologists, psychiatrists, etc., will refer to when they're diagnosing someone with a mental disorder of some kind. And I found it really interesting, looking at Mark Spector's alters, his different personalities, and I do like, and obviously it's fictionalized. He has, superhero powers and everything, which is, makes for an interesting story. But I also just liked looking at, I guess the psychology behind it because they did reveal, as a kid, you saw his upbringing and how he, not that he murdered his brother by any means, but in an unfortunate accident, he lost his brother, and his mom was blaming him unfairly about it and was very abusive in doing so. And so this really, was psychologically damaging for him, which I liked that they showed that because often people who have dissociative identity disorder, it develops during their childhood from, a lot of times it's very severe abuse, and, as a way of coping with it at such a young age, they may not know how to, so they kind of run away and escape, pretending, mentally, they run away and escape with this alter ego, I guess you can imagine it as, which they showed, I feel, pretty well in the show.
I thought it was interesting how his alternate identity, Stephen Grant, was a character on a show that he watched. It was like an Indiana Jones type guy who was like afraid of nothing, and you can pretty clearly see why like he might have latched onto that, when he was afraid, and it's kind of sad when you think about it, but it's also kind of interesting because like Steven in the show, his alter, not the Indiana Jones character, is actually kind of cowardly. So like I guess he's sort of developed as an alternate identity since that time. But yeah, I thought it was an interesting reveal because you don't start off the show knowing that Stephen Grant isn't a real person. You start off the show thinking that Stephen Grant is like a guy, and like Mark Spector, who is the real guy, was like some sort of like ghost possessing him or something. But it turns out Mark Spector is like the original, and Stephen is just a coping mechanism essentially. And in a weirdly like meta way, Stephen was like really upset to learn about that, which I think it would be kind of shocking to find out that your life is a whole lie. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely would shake up your whole world.
Mm-hmm.
I do also find it interesting that, with Moon Knight, and granted, I didn't read the comics or anything, but choosing to go with Moon Knight as the next Disney plus Marvel TV show, I find it interesting with them diving into dissociative identity disorder, if I can talk right. But I find it interesting that they decide to dive into that because I feel like you can get mixed uh, results with the audiences because depending how you go about it, it can be seen as good or bad representations of dissociative identity disorder, or really any type of disorder when it comes down to it, because it's kind of a sensitive topic overall.
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking about things that do affect real people in real life, representation of minority groups are always sort of extra closely scrutinized, because if you do it wrong, it can be quite offensive, and especially when it comes to mental illness, where like it can be very, very traumatic for people who genuinely have it. You don't want to be getting it wrong. Personally speaking, and this is just my opinion, I would argue that they have a pretty sympathetic view on the character. I mean, he is the main character. He is a hero, and in the end, I feel like he usually does the right thing. Um, there are arguably traits that like might put him in a bad light, but like I would kind of argue that that's just him being a human being, being fallible. It wouldn't be a very good character if he didn't have any flaws. But like you really see, especially in the latter half of the episodes, a lot of the struggles that he goes through and why he developed this, illness, and how he's managing it, and how he like tries to grow and change as a character over time. And I don't know. I think it's pretty uplifting, if anything. But you know, if you feel differently, go ahead and let us know in the comments. We're always open to different interpretations. That's what art is. It's pretty subjective, and you might have taken a completely different message away from it. Who knows? But anyway.
I can see both sides of, I can understand the different arguments. For instance, some people may not like that it's a main contributing factor in the story of, Mark Spector's conflict with his dissociative identity disorder because, for instance, like some people, if you look at the movie Psycho, which is also about dissociative identity disorder, it's not about psychopathy by any means, but having labels like psychopath or calling someone a psycho, they might really hate having that label attached to it because people in real life who may have these disorders, they could be seen as dangerous or a threat. What I find really interesting is that in actuality, they're more likely to be victims of violence rather than the one perpetrating it, but that's a whole other topic in itself. but some people, they maybe just don't want, that attachment. They don't want maybe a character, in this instance, having dissociative identity disorder being, well, now I'm thinking of things like Split, where he's really scary and, like kidnapped those girls.
I mean,
And
not every alter was bad,
I
but,
know.
yeah, generally I can see where they might find issue.
Yeah, so it's, in cases like that, people are like, oh, I'm so sick of seeing these mental disorders being tagged onto these characters, and maybe it's like, a horror film or whatever. And in this case, like, we see, like, Mark Spector, his personality, he's kind of morally gray, I think. Jake Lockley is the more scary one that's, like, revealed at the end because he's more of, like, an assassin type. Um,
Yeah, and like I think that they do a decent job at sort of like giving in-universe reasoning for all of this because Mark Spector really only works as Moon Knight to protect his wife Layla because there was sort of a vague threat made by Khonshu, the god of the moon, the Egyptian god of the moon, who he works for, that if he wasn't Khonshu's avatar, which is basically his like human, uh, the guy who does things for him just in human form because they can't really do anything themselves. They need like someone to actually enact their will. Um, he's Khonshu's avatar mainly because if he wasn't Khonshu's avatar, Khonshu kind of like indicated like, hey, if you're not my avatar, I'll just have Layla be my avatar, and he really didn't want that. So he's mainly following Khonshu for that reason, and I'm not sure what personal reason Jake Lockley, the third alter, would have for following Khonshu, but for all we know at this point in time, because Jake was really only like revealed in like the very last scene of the series, all we know at this time is that he's just following Khonshu's orders. Speaking of which, Khonshu is honestly a pretty interesting character himself. He's very uh, interested in ensuring that things are just and that those who are in the wrong get what's coming to them. And he's almost got like an unhinged Batman thing going on where he doesn't care how it happens, just so long as like people pay. I wouldn't honestly consider Conchu to be like a good guy necessarily. He just happens to want justice, which is generally a good thing. He doesn't care how it happens, though.
I found Conchu's character very intriguing because, like, I respect the whole, making sure that justice is served. I really respect that, but he does go about it in ways where it's very, he's just a morally ambiguous
Yeah.
character.
And it's interesting because like you kind of juxtapose him against Ahmed, which is the actual main bad guy in the series, which we have managed to not really talk about much yet. Ahmed is basically Khonshu, except she's like killing bad guys or locking them up after they've done a crime isn't good enough. We need to do it before they even commit the crime, and she's got that magical ability to judge people's hearts for any past or future action somehow. It's a goddess power, I guess, that she has. And, I think that most people would agree that locking someone away for something they haven't done yet is relatively not the thing you should do. There are people who probably would think that, like, that's reasonable, but, like, I personally, anyway, think that it's not particularly reasonable to lock people up for things that they haven't done yet, even if you do know that they're going to do them.
Yeah, well, she has a mindset of guilty until proven innocent, and
Yeah.
and I think it's interesting because I think they presented it in a way where I can see where people would agree with her and want to follow her, but the show has a tone where it's like, well, this is clearly very wrong. Everyone is innocent until proven guilty.
Yeah,
And
yeah, they definitely like the show itself tends to side with Khonshu here, but at the same time, it's not fully siding with Khonshu because like he's still kind of like he has like a mindset of like the ends justify the means, which oftentimes can lead you to doing things that really shouldn't be justifiable. um,
Like terrorizing Mark Spector's various personalities.
yeah. Um, or like it was really interesting. So at the very end of the show, after the final non-battle, because we didn't see it, Mark and Steven both agreed and came to like a, a beautiful conclusion that they don't want to work for Conchu anymore, and they're not going to. And it was a really big moment for him because he's sort of been like tormented about this for like the last, I don't even know how many years. I forget how many years it was like in the continuity, but it's been a while, and it's kind of like a sucker punch at the very end in like the end credit scene because technically Mark and Steven don't work for Conchu anymore. Conchu said that he released them. He didn't release Jake Lockley though, who still does work for him and is basically still Moon Knight for him, which I think is kind of funny and messed up.
Conchu would be a fantastic lawyer.
Yeah. Your Honor, no, no, no. I released Mark and Steven. I didn't release Jake.
So fuck you.
Loophole, baby. Um, and speaking of just like the whole sort of what's the word for it? Philosophical sort of like ideas between the two of them. Uh, I do think that this has been one of the better Marvel villain duos, I guess, because it was both Arthur Harrow and Ahmed, who he was the avatar for Ahmed, just like Mark is the avatar for Khonshu. And I think that Ahmed just has like a sort of like more uh, extremist view of everything and genuinely believes like everyone should be judged. Honestly, Arthur seems like he's just kind of like following blindly more so. He seems to believe what she's saying, but like a lot of it is revealed a lot of his spite for Khonshu is because he used to be Khonshu's avatar before Mark. And so it's actually a lot more personal for him. And so you actually have like two very different like ideologies about like what should be done, even amongst the two villains and the two um, protagonists, Khonshu and Amit and Mark and Arthur. And so like all of these people have their own ideas, but they're like still diametrically opposed. And I find it kind of interesting how they went for that because it could have been a lot less complicated, but it made it a lot more interesting this way, I think.
Yeah, I do feel like because I tend to struggle with writing villains, for instance, or antagonists, and trying to come up with believable motives. And I feel like their motives, all these characters, they all feel very real. Like these could be real people,
Mm-hmm.
and they have reasonable, reasons, I guess, for wanting to carry out these actions and succeed with their goals. I can kind of see where each person is coming from. A lot of them are, maybe have kind of a skewed belief, for instance, punishing people who haven't actually done the questionable action.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can see where they're all coming from, and it's not like they're a cliche black and white villain that's evilly twisting their mustache and laughing.
Yeah, and it's not even, well, it kind of is and it kind of isn't, but like there's like uh it's almost a meme at this point where like practically every Marvel movie villain is just like a carbon copy of the hero but bad. And I can see where like you could still kind of think that way with this one because both the good guy and the bad guy are Egyptian deities and the avatar of Egyptian deities. So it's like I can see where you would see the parallels, and it's basically just that again. But it felt like they made efforts to separate them more this time. Like if you think back to some of the worst perpetrators of this, like Black Jacket and Ant Man being literally it's just Ant Man, but he's like crazy, or like in Iron Man, it was just Iron Man but big. Stuff like that. Like that's the way it usually like goes down. But all the best Marvel villains have been at least like very ideologically different than their hero counterparts. If they even still like usually ended up looking and fighting in similar manners. Like a lot of people love Killmonger from Black Panther, even though he basically is just Golden Black Panther, in terms of like how he fights and stuff. But like he was very, his character itself was very fleshed out, and he had very different like ideologies and like the way of looking at things, and it was understandable. Honestly, he was just trying to reclaim what he felt was rightfully his, and the people really like his character for that. So like, even if arguably, the villains are still like, oh, it's just the hero but bad. Um, you can still at least see like a decent amount of difference here, and I like that. I like that it's not just, oh, but they're crazy or something.
Yeah. So I feel like if you ever want to take some inspiration when it comes to brainstorming over an antagonist, Moon Knight has some good examples here. Sometimes you're just kind of following orders, or you're following a what's the word, a role model, someone you look up to a blinding extent, and
Mm-hmm.
you might be brainwashed in that case. He had good intentions, but going about it a bad way.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that can make for a really, really dangerous person.
So, to sum up in brief, good things I liked about it were just sort of the overall presentation and sort of the intrigue with the character and like the complexity of the main character. Oscar Isaac's performance was really, really good. Probably the best I've ever seen from him. Um, I'd be surprised if they didn't get a second season or like a movie or something.
Well, I feel like they left it off in a way where it's, at least if you watch like the ending credit scene, I feel like it's left off in a way where there must be more.
There probably will be, especially if I know the MCU. Um, but like for once, I feel like he would be a pretty welcome addition to the MCU in my eyes. Um, so I'm generally positive about it. If there's one thing I will say, it's I feel like a lot of things took way too long to happen in the beginning and way too short of a time to conclude in the end. It wasn't quite as satisfying as I wish it could have been. Um, and uh, like certain parts, I kind of did feel dragging. Like by the time in the middle where like a fight would happen and either Mark or Steven will like black out and all of a sudden everyone's dead. It's like by the third or fourth time that's happening, you know what's gonna happen, and you're just kind of like, okay, well, I'd like to see it, Um, so it's definitely not perfect, but it is for sure. I think at the very least my second favorite MCU TV show. I don't know if I would rank it higher than WandaVision. I really liked WandaVision. But yeah, it's definitely worth a try. Not a try, a look. And what do you think?
I was actually gonna mention there was a little thing that happened towards the end that I personally am not a big fan of, and I do like Layla's character, but there was the whole reveal when she found out that Mark was there when her father was killed, and she was like really upset with him and was kind of blaming him a bit. And the way I looked at it, it's like, well, I feel like he clearly didn't want him or any of those other people to die. So I felt kind of bad for Mark. And I guess it's one of those conflicts that may be tossed in, especially with if there's a romantic pairing. In this case, I want to say they were divorced or in the process of getting a
They were
divorce.
going to get a divorce,
Oh.
but none of that happened during the series because they were trying to stop Ahmed.
Okay. So in the process of getting a divorce, but it's one of those conflicts that's kind of like tossed in for a little bit of drama between these two characters. And I feel like, stepping back and looking at it, more logically, it's clear to see that Mark, he didn't want her dad to die. I mean, he was almost killed himself. He was betrayed by, wasn't it a friend of his?
Yeah, so I think that Mark, it's been a little bit since I've watched it. I believe that he made a deal with somebody to, I think, just like raid an archaeological dig site and like sell the artifacts or something for lots of money. I think that that's what he made a deal for. I can't remember why exactly.
And then at death's door, he became Moon Knight.
Right.
But
Well, hold on. Before that, the guy he was working with that was gonna like sabotage the whole thing kind of went rogue and shot everyone up, including him, because I guess if you're working with shady people, shady things are gonna happen. I guess,
yeah,
and that's when he, became Moon Knight because Khonshu found him on death's door, like you said, and offered him, I guess, a second chance at life by being like, "Yo, be my avatar and you can live." And he's like, "All right, fine."
yeah, understandable.
Yeah.
I can kind of see where Layla was upset that Mark didn't tell her this, and I want to say it was revealed that part of the reason why they ended up getting together to begin with was because
it's because they met because her dad died.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, I kind of get it. Like, I could see both sides. I can see where she would be upset about that, but I can also see where, for Mark, it's a sensitive topic to bring up. So I understand both sides.
And Mark was clearly seen throughout the series to be bad at communication. He was.
Oh yeah,
he was
bad.
very much the type of person to not tell someone else what's going on, simply for the sake of like, oh, you don't need to get involved. I don't want you to have to deal with all that. And it's like, I guess kind of admirable not to want to get her involved, but she was already involved and he was just being stupid for not talking to her. People, if you need any relationship advice, communication is like 90% of your whole relationship. If you just talk to each other, things will work out a lot better. It's not a guarantee, but it'll work out better.
Yeah.
And that's kind of why I don't like many dramas that will like dip their toes into like the pool of like miscommunication drama, because it's like the cheapest and stupidest and most annoying way of creating drama, because they just don't understand what the other one's saying. Extra points if it's like literally they just misheard what they said and that's the reason there's drama. That's like the stupidest thing to me.
Yeah, that's a lot to depend on for the plot.
Yeah.
And a part of it, when it comes to miscommunication or misunderstanding in a plot, I mean, part of me understands because that's a very real thing that happens in real life, but I also see, as the audience, as a reader, it's very frustrating. You want to shake the character by the shoulders, slap him a few times, and it's just very frustrating. And so I feel like that's where I felt a little frustrated, and I think that was like at least 3/4 of the way through the series, this little, drama happened, and I wanted to shake both of them and be like, stop, just kiss.
In the show's defense, to an extent, this wasn't like a huge part of the series, so it's not like this took up a ton of screen time and was like super dramatic or anything. It was just there, and it happened occasionally. And I guess like if I were someone who didn't care for it, at the very least, it's not super intrusive.
No, it's really not a huge part of the story. I do like though that we see, Mark Spector, like what you mentioned, a character flaw of his is just that he's awful with communication, and so. If you ever want ideas of flaws for your characters, there's one, and it's very effective for the plot because it can cause issues.
Just be aware that if you do it too much, people will get upset at you for doing that.
There's definitely a balance. You have to execute it properly, which I feel like overall it was executed pretty well because you saw throughout the series that, different instances where him and Layla were clashing because he's very private with his feelings,
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's like the root of their issues. It's pretty clear that's the root of their issues.
Mm-hmm.
And then, um, forgot his name for a second. Stephen Grant is just like the total opposite, total cinnamon roll,
Big ol' sweetheart.
and you could tell even Layla at one point was like, "I prefer this guy." It's
Yeah.
like, why can't you be sweet, like
I even I
Stephen?
even had like a theory as I was watching it that Steven was created in response to their marital distress, as sort of like a way to, I guess, save their marriage. Like Steven, because the thing is, like Steven did everything right that Mark Spector did wrong. Like he knew about Egyptology, which like she also knew a lot about that because she was the daughter of an archaeologist. He at one point he even specifically said like that he liked a book that ended up being Layla's favorite book. Like that was pretty early on that was established, and so like that was like suspiciously specific to me, and I was like, oh, he must have like been a response to like Mark being absolutely terrible at meeting Layla's needs, but that didn't end up happening. But like you can kind of see where my line of logic was.
Kind of a little side tangent, but related to what you say about how he had knowledge with, um,
Egyptology.
yeah, so he had a lot of knowledge with Egyptology, and I thought that was a good detail to include, especially if you look at it in a sense of like, dissociative identity disorder. And, I'm not a specialist. I might be going to school for psychology, but I can't diagnose anyone by any means. But, like different alters with dissociative identity disorder will have knowledge of different things. And so I thought it was interesting seeing gaps in knowledge, or maybe Mark wasn't, he didn't specialize with some of these things, but Stephen Grant did, and I thought that was a good touch. And there was, circling back around, there was a few other things I did want to mention about representation with dissociative identity disorder. So, one example, and this is using a different disorder as an example, schizophrenia. It's not uncommon at all for people with schizophrenia to view their disorder as, a superpower or a special ability. And whether people with dissociative identity disorder, whether they do feel this way as well, I couldn't say, but I wouldn't be surprised if maybe they could view their disorder as a superpower as well, which is kind of ironic with Moon Knight because he literally has superpowers. And I can see this as a good or bad thing. Like, some people might be really offended by this, like maybe families who, maybe they have a loved one who has dissociative identity disorder, and they might view it as like, this is not something to romanticize, this is really hard for all of us. And then some might view it as like, we're so happy to have the representation and to have it seen as a good thing, or not like, a terrifying, devastating thing. It really depends how you view it, and again, it's a very sensitive topic, but
I do want to say though, just as sort of a technical clarification, which may change the way you look at it a little bit. I mean, like, Moon Knight's powers actually don't have anything to do with his mental illness, so, like, on a technical level, um, the show is not, like, condoning people who may have an illness and may think that they have powers because of it, because on a technical level, he has his powers because of Khonshu, and not because he happens to have DID. So, just a clarification there. But anyway, let us know what you think of the show, and again, let us know any sort of theories you might have about what this would mean for mental health representation, what your opinions about these things are, and just what you thought of it overall. And we will see you with the next ramble. maybe Doctor Strange. It may not be. We have seen that movie, the new one, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. But I have been Michael,
No, I've been Deanna.
and this has been Rare's Ramble. See you.
See you.